So the time is finally upon us. Hallows Eve, the night before Christmas. Oh wait, we're saving that for another video. That's right, in just a few hours, it will officially be the second spookiest day of the year, beaten out only by April 15th. And what a roller coaster it has been. A whole month of spooks and scares, and also one video about Superman that was kind of out of place now that I think about it. And in the tradition of scary stories being made into fun kids adventures, I thought it'd be fun to share a movie with you that I've been enjoying this time of year, since I was a slightly smaller, less red balloon. But since I so cleverly alluded to earlier, I'm saving The Nightmare Before Christmas for future discussion. But hey, while we're in the realm of horror stories aimed at a younger audience directed by Henry Selick, I know, very specific, right? I think it'd be cool if we dive into another one of his features that I'm really fond of, that being 2009's Coraline. A film plenty of you probably remember as being that one with the talking cat and button eyes, as well as the culprit of an embarrassingly high number of bedwetting nightmares. Me excluded, since I kinda was already brought up in a Tim Burton-esque haunted house by my folks, making the likes of Coraline child's play for me. Which was pretty convenient since, when it came out, I was a literal child. And it's also probably the reason that it stuck with me, and has remained a subject I fixate on every now and again, even to this day. And now I want to share with you what has kept me coming back to this movie after all these years. Because we've all grown up with some form of entertainment geared towards our specific age bracket, and looking back with the benefit of hindsight and, aging a bit, we can reflect and say, while we had fun with them as a kid, they just don't quite hit the same now that we're grown. But that's not the case with Coraline. Because even as I got older, I still kept noticing things that I didn't recognize before that further enhanced the experience. So that's what I want to take a closer look into today. What makes Coraline such a memorable movie despite being an admittedly simple story? What are some of the details that you might have missed? And how does this all come together to make the film not just a great movie for all ages, but a timeless classic? So grab that mysterious key you keep stashed away in your junk drawer and plop in those shiny button eyes, and let's discuss. Coraline is a movie that I'm sure plenty of you are familiar with. And for the 3 people in my audience who aren't, so a quarter of my viewership, it's about a girl who comes to a new town, who whilst feeling neglected by her family, stumbles upon this tiny little door, that when she goes through it, takes her to a counterpart of her own world where in it everything seems perfect. Keyword there being seems. And now spoilers moving forward. Obviously things go wrong, everything is revealed to be not what it seems, blah blah evil stuff, button eyes, bug-like spider lady, and a talking cat.
Wuspus.
So now with the basics out of the way, let's begin breaking down why this film is such a standout in the first place. Starting with the story, as I described, the film is not exactly complicated. It's a pretty straightforward, be careful what you wish for and the grass is always greener on the other side kind of situation. Similar to things you might see in something like Alice in Wonderland, only instead of a rabbit hole, we have here a locked door. So in terms of originality, it's not the most unique story ever told. But when it comes to filmmaking, it's not just about being the first to a particular tale, but also, how well do you tell it in general? Like how I keep slipping in new ways to remind you to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. And with the film Coraline, by centering the story in a very familiar situation that I'm sure a lot of people have been through, that being moving to a new town, this is a concept that many kids in the target audience have probably been able to relate to, or at the very least, fear in the back of their mind. Having to leave behind your entire life, only to plant roots somewhere you've never been, and in this case, the middle of nowhere, that's not only a frightening situation to find yourself in, but also one steeped in depression and gloom. And that gets me to another point that I wanted to address, which is that Coraline, it doesn't hold back in terms of its horror. Sure, it's not explicitly gruesome, and no one technically dies, other than those children, but they were dead long before the film even started. But it's the implied consequences of failure, along with the psychological impact, that really just make this more out there than your average kid feature. Especially with these creepy designs paired up against the uncanny movement that comes with stop motion animation, that definitely led to it resonating with audiences, even over a decade after its initial release. I mean hell, I'd argue that Coraline, despite being aimed at a younger demographic, would constitute as a horror film, just in the sheer fact of its main threat is one that instills fear and terror into our protagonist, and is not one that can be overcome in a straight-on fight, but rather needs to be tricked and outsmarted just merely to survive its wrath. Also, the creepy-ass imagery that comes with the territory of your main antagonist having buttons for eyes. And there might be a broader discussion to be had about whether or not this material is even suitable for kids. But personally, while not having any kids of my own, at least not that I know of, I don't think there's anything in this thing that someone over the age of like 10 would be unable to handle. And plus, the fact that it treats its predominantly younger audience with such respect and assuming their intelligence.
Marge, do you respect my intelligence?
Yes!
Okay!
Is another reason why this thing stands out from so many other of its peers. Because after all, kids aren't necessarily stupid. Yeah, I don't have the same life experience as the rest of us, but if you treat them like they're just a bunch of idiots, then what do you think they're gonna grow up to be? That's just gonna get us even more live streamers or, God forbid, YouTube video essayists. In addition to its respect for its audience's intelligence, I do think its fear factor further contributes to its memorability, and helped it to garner such a wide fan base. But though the scares are what a lot of people typically remember, I do think it has a level of depth, and moreover, an attention to detail that cannot be appreciated with just a single viewing. It's really the little things that keep me coming back to it. Like how throughout the movie you can see that the other mother is constantly serving food, but her plate is always completely empty, most likely because she has something different in mind she wants to consume. Or how the family drives a Volkswagen Beetle, keeping within the insect theme. Or even how the doll we see in the beginning initially looks like the little girl who's the sister of Wyborn's grandmother. And throughout the entire movie how you can constantly see it moving around between shots. Or even the palette choice having the color blue be explicitly called out consistently throughout the film.
List everything that's blue.
Boring blue boy. Blue hair.
My monkey slippers are blue.
You also have things like the blue gravy train, the cat's blue eyes, Coraline's blue nails, Mr. Robinski's blue, the ladies downstairs have blue eyeshadow and glasses, and how in the end of the garden party everyone's wearing blue gloves. Blue is just kind of a symbol that keeps popping up, typically related to creativity and freedom, as well as Coraline's connection to the real world, whereas orange is more attributed with the other world. And the film also does a great job at setting up things that will pay off later on down the line. Like is the case with Coraline's Other Father's Song, being filled with little references to things like dolls and buttons. Or how the film is constantly drawing attention to the other mother's hands, which will eventually become an antagonist within the third act. There's just a lot of little details jam-packed into this tight runtime, and it's all expertly set up throughout the adventure, and that's something that's a little bit unusual when it comes to kids' movies. A lot of times these things are very surface level, you know, standard adventure, good lessons being learned, and typically uncomplicated dynamics between characters, but it's all very upfront, leaving very little room for interpretation and reflection once the film is wrapped. But that's not how Coraline operates. Instead, leaving a lot left unsaid and allowing your mind to wander far beyond the borders of the screen itself. It demands that you pay attention and keep an eye out for bits of information that aren't explicitly told to you. But it also doesn't take your viewership for granted, and so provides as much entertainment value in the visuals, music, and of course the characters. Speaking of which, who are these people that will be taking us through this journey? Well, starting with the folks responsible for the move, Coraline's parents, the Joneses, take on the role of the distant absentee caregivers. They are these overburdened writers that are seemingly forced to upend their entire life in order to pursue their careers. And this has left them at odds with their daughter Coraline. And while some might find this problematic, even possibly abusive in how the parents are treating their child, context clues are key. What with both of them being on a tight deadline, also having undergone a move, and the mother clearly suffering injuries in a very recent accident. It's less a case of them actively and maliciously doing harm to their child, and instead not being able to meet the moment when it counts. And throughout the movie you can see them trying to be more present as Coraline begins pulling away. And the other residents of the Pink Palace are also extremely well depicted. You got this eccentric Russian man living in the top unit, named Mr. Bobinsky, who trains a circus full of mice. And also, one of my friends pointed this out, apparently served in the Chernobyl cleanup crew, and this is evident by that pin he wears on his chest, being in recognition of his efforts. Yeah, I never knew that growing up, that was wild. Might also explain why the man is blue and can talk to mice. And then there's Miss Forbidden Spink living in the basement unit. Who are these kooky mystical ladies who have a background in show business, and have a number of their own eccentricities, including, whoa! Alright, I said I wasn't afraid of this movie growing up, but these scenes definitely confused the hell out of me as a kid. But you know, they stuffed dogs and enjoyed a theater, along with a few other things that make them just incredibly memorable, sometimes not always for the best of reasons. And finally there's the friendly, if not quirky, Wyborn, a kid around the same age as Coraline who's trying to connect with her, but considering he's got the same amount of riz as I did at that age, well, let's just say he has a number of critical fumbles. But considering Coraline herself is not too good at picking up on red flags, it actually ends up working out for him in the end. However, now we get to the star of the show, the cat. He's wise, mysterious, and voiced by Keith David. What more can you want?
Welcome to hell, mother.
Alright, but really, we gotta talk about who this movie's named after. So, how is the character of Coraline Jones? Well, first off, in terms of her performance, she is brilliantly realized by Dakota Fanning, who, if you can believe it, was only around 9 or 10 when cast for the role. And in terms of how she is written, Coraline is one of the most relatable and believable characters in movies in general. Being able to avoid that typical main character syndrome in a lot of stories like this, you know, things like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, The Hunger Games, Diversion, all these, stories following younger characters. The main problem a lot of these ones suffer from is that their protagonist isn't all that interesting. But Coraline is different from many of her contemporaries, in that she has a much more defined personality, being goofy and outgoing, while also trying her best to keep her insecurities under wraps, and instead doing everything she can to enjoy the situation, despite being knocked down at every turn. She desperately craves some measure of attention and affection that she feels like she's been lacking ever since her family first stepped foot in that pink palace. And this is compounded on by the fact that no one's willing to give her the time of day, let alone even know how to pronounce her name.
Caroline.
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 Caroline, Caroline, Caroline.
Coraline.
Except for, I guess, that annoying kid Wyborn, leaving her just feeling incredibly vulnerable and alone. But despite this, she still has a level of creativity and curiosity that make her more than just a standard audience surrogate. Yeah, she'll don that more heroic persona when the situation calls for it, but it's never her first decision. In fact, she was willing to abandon those kids in the other world out of fear of ever having to encounter her other mother again. And it's only because her parents are taken away from her that she musters up the courage to face her adversary one-on-one, with a little bit of help from Keith David Cat, of course. So yeah, an incredibly fleshed out main character, who's only matched by one other in the story in terms of how they're depicted, and that of course being her foe, the other mother, or the Beldam. And this needle-filled spider lady is one of the main sources of fear that many point to when referencing this film. And for good reason, with her spider-like appendages, her elongated features, and her playful but sinister performance by Terry Hatcher. Being able to jump back and forth between motherly and kind, but also sinister and monstrous. And that's only when she's playing the other mother, considering the fact that she also plays, the main mother as well. Her ability to differentiate these two, while also drawing similarities, is a tight balancing act that Hatcher is able to make look effortless. And with the support of the amazing writing, this character is so well fleshed out. Being this creepy, sinister presence, who is constantly looming over her prey, and is so in control of the situation until one thing goes astray. And then she becomes a chaotic force of vengeance, bearing down on whatever dared to step out of place. And I so love that the film remains mysterious around her, never fully explaining what this creature is, letting your imagination run wild. Speaking of which, let's talk about this world a little. The world itself is beautifully fleshed out. It's such an immediately recognizable location, while also managing to feel timeless and otherworldly. The quiet emptiness that fills the space between every scene is palpable throughout the entire runtime. It's not jam-packed with big, gaudy features or bright colors, instead taking this much more subdued approach, allowing it to contrast nicely with the other world, which does partake in this neon flashy imagery. From the massive full moon to the never-ending night, the clear skies, the bright lights like they're in a carnival. There's a very clear distinction drawn between the two worlds, which is incredibly important considering the fact that they're supposed to be pretty much carbon copies of one another. But there's never a point in the film in which you forget which side of reality you're on, all down to the impeccable art design. You just can't praise this film's aesthetics enough. It really has just a unique look of its own that I can't get enough of. Even the character models themselves are exaggerated and cartoonish, but also feel so real. They're expressive and articulate in a way that makes them oh so fun to watch. And with the actors' performances matching perfectly with their clay counterparts, you quickly forget that this thing is even stop motion to begin with. But it's most impressive when the other world begins falling apart, that these designs go from being idealized versions of their real-world counterparts into twisted and mangled monstrosities that will get burned into your psyche. I also just love the choice to make the other mother just so bug-like, having her decor turning into a bunch of different looking insects, and the climax of the film taking place in a giant spider's web. And boy, do they not shy away from the horrific implications of sewing buttons into one person's eye. Yeah, Jesus Christ, that line,
So sharp you won't feel a thing.
Ow!
in a kid's movie, they couldn't get away with that today. How we have fallen as a society.
When I kiss my homies goodnight, society calls me gay.
There's just so much to explore and to dive into. And that's really all down to the amazing talent on and behind the screen. Director Henry Selick is of course no stranger to stop-motion animated features. Aside from being known for seemingly only owning one shirt, he's also responsible for such films as the aforementioned Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, and Wendell and Wild. Not an extensive catalog, but definitely some major highlights. And while with other creatives, something like this might look like a bare-bones resume, when it comes to how his films are often produced, that being stop-motion animation, it actually makes a lot of sense. Stop-motion animated films like this take a long time to make, basically having to take a picture every time a character moves, and building thousands of different sculptures in order to realize these worlds. It's because of this you'll notice a lot of attention to detail is put into every single shot. And this is all realized by the team at Laika Production, who spent nearly 2 years just putting the models and sets together. And this was always planned to be a stop-motion animated project, dating as far back as the year 2000, though it wouldn't enter pre-production until 2004, only to finally be released in 2009. But all this work clearly paid off in the final results, because this film is amazing to look at. The fluidity in which these characters move, and the intricacy in which it's shot, boggles the mind. The fact that they're both able to do this stop-motion puppetry while moving the camera requires countless hours of planning and months to execute on. I mean, I can only imagine how difficult it was to put together that jumping mice performance. In fact, it took an entire week just to produce 90 seconds worth of footage. But all this effort would have been nothing if the story itself wasn't there to deliver. And luckily for everyone involved, the script itself is tremendous. Balancing childlike whimsy with otherworldly horrors, all while maintaining a consistent tone, and even managing to deliver on some really hard-hitting emotional beats. The story does not pull any punches. This is also all balanced out by a beautiful yet haunting soundtrack. Composed by Bruno Coulet with help from the band They Might Be Giants, is both eerie but also beautiful. And the lyrics are sung in this mysterious language that, upon looking it up, turns out is just completely gibberish. But it sounds pretty. All in all, Coraline is just one of a kind. A film where it just seemed like everything was firing on all cylinders. From the cast, to the story, to the animation, the music, everything here just works. And yeah, as I said, it's a very simple story, but the level of craft, care, and attention to detail on display here shows that it doesn't matter how unique of a tale you're telling, so long as the substance that you're putting on screen is up to par, then you can tell the same story an endless number of times in a variety of different ways. And yeah, its fear factor certainly played a role in it being as memorable as it ended up becoming, but I think the fact that it treats its audience with a level of respect and care, that has allowed it to stand the test of time, and still be remembered fondly to this day, as a classic, creepy, timeless tale reminding us to remain skeptical of that which appears too good to be true. Now let's just hope Disney doesn't try and go make it live action or some crazy nonsense. Anyways, happy Halloween! Hey, thanks for watching, and if you stuck all the way to the end, why don't you check out another one of our videos on screen now. And if you want to chat directly, come join our Discord, link in the description below.